Hey everybody, it's Danny from the Small Venue Survivalist here with you again, and it is time for another edition of the video series on mixing a live CD for the band Suspect. This time around, our subject is the guitar. This is also an opportunity for me to show you that it is entirely possible, with a little bit of know-how and a little bit of signal flow manipulation, to create multiband compression without actually having a multiband compressor plugin. To get started, let's listen to the guitar track completely dry. For this mix, I wanted to make the guitar really full-bodied, even maybe a little bit more full-bodied than it normally would be. And the reason is because in Suspect, the guitar is really the anchoring force for the chords, and so I wanted to make it extra big. The good news is that, as you could hear, we had a pretty decent guitar track coming in, so it was just a matter of making a few tweaks. The first step in making the guitar's bottom end really full was to isolate just the bottom end so I could work on it independently of the higher end. And so I used a filter plugin to kill off everything above 300 and also throw away the frequencies below 100 Hertz, which I wanted to leave for the bass and kick drum. Having gotten the low end isolated, I could then compress just the low end. And the point of doing this is to squeeze the dynamic range of the low end down a bit so that it can be big all the time without getting out of control. Without this dynamic range reduction, the risk is that you make the bottom end really big when it's in an average sort of place, and then when you get to a section where the low end is really accentuated, it then gets too big. It gets out of proportion. And so you sacrifice dynamic range for being able to have a consistent level all the time. Here's what the low end of the guitar sounds like when it's been isolated and compressed. The next step was to create a complementary filter on another copy of the guitar part so that that would become the high end. You may have also noticed that I aggressively filtered the guitar above about 7K. And the reason for this is that in a fair amount of high gain guitar sounds, the information above 5 to 7K really isn't all that helpful. It really doesn't have a lot of musical information in it. It's mostly just a bunch of noise. And so you can chuck all that out and make more room for the high end in your cymbals and vocals and other instruments. Here's what that sounded like in isolation. At this point, I could bus the low and high guitar sounds together and blend them to taste. This is what that sounded like. Now, it's true that that's a little bit out of proportion in favor of the low end, but I wasn't done yet, and I wanted to err on the side of having too much bottom because I knew I could get it back into control later. What I wanted to do next was apply a stereoization effect to the guitar. This all being, again, in the name of making the guitar extra big. To do this, I used a pseudo stereo plugin that creates comb filtered copies of the guitar part and puts one in the left speaker and one in the right. The great thing about this is that it's completely mono compatible. That is, if your mix collapses to mono, then the guitar sounds perfectly normal. But if you have stereo speakers, it sounds like the guitar is actually taking up more space in the soundstage. Now it was time to go to work with an EQ. My goal with the EQ was to get the low end under control, accentuate certain parts of the mid-range to make the guitar really fill that area, and then leave a bit of a hole for the bass to live in. Now, hearing the guitar in isolation like this, I can totally understand if you're questioning my sanity a bit. But I had it in mind, as I said before, that I really wanted the guitar to carry the sort of thick bottom and leave other spaces for the bass. And in terms of the top end, I wanted to leave that for other things as well. What that means is that the guitar becomes sort of this mid-range monster that takes over a lot of that space. When you hear it without the context of other instruments, it can be pretty strange, but once you put it all together, it starts to make sense. The last piece of the guitar puzzle was to apply some overall compression to keep the guitar level consistent all the way through the mix. And so in this case, I got a little heavy-handed with it using a compressor with an infinity to 1 ratio, that is to say, a limiter. But again, this serves the purpose of making the guitar big all the time. It also helps to tame some of the dynamic swings that make the guitar and the guitar's bottom end get a little bit overbearing. If you're still not convinced that this guitar part can mix in with other things and sound decent, then you're just going to have to tune in subsequent weeks when more of the mix comes together. Ha! How's that for a sequel hook? Anyway, that's it for this video. Hope you liked it. Please come and visit me over at smallvenuesurvivalist.com. Cheers!